Okay, well, welcome back to the Boardroom Company Live, the podcast for professionals who are looking for advice on how to build their board career. I'm your host, Naomi Kent, and today we're going to hear from a board member, chairman, and entrepreneur, and he will share his insights about how to build a corporate board career. So, our guest is Scott Eisenberg. He's an experienced and award winning manager of middle market M&A transactions, restructurings, and complex financial transactions. He's also a serial entrepreneur, having started and co founded 4 companies. He currently serves as the chairman of the board of PC Server and Parts. He's a board member of Speed Grip Chuck Company, Hybrid Lifts, Sterling Technologies, and he's also on the boards of Yoga Moves and the Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Detroit. So we're going to find out from Scott how he got his board career started, what he recommends you do to increase your chances of being selected. And of course, he'll share his story about when he had to step away from a board. So welcome, Scott. Thank you for joining me.
Good morning, Naomi. Thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Wonderful. So tell me about how your executive career got started and then how it led to serving on boards a little later.
Sure. So I grew up in the accounting and finance world. CPA, MBA, spent 8 years with Deloitte, the last couple doing transactional work. Then I went to a small investment company where we invested in companies. And interestingly enough, at that company, we did not take board positions in the company, but we got board observation rights, and so I started sitting in on board meetings at that point. We sold that company, and then I co-founded my first firm, which is a firm, Amherst Partners, which was an investment banking and turnaround consulting firm. And I did that for 25 years. We ultimately merged part of Amherst into a national firm called Capstone Partners, and Capstone got acquired by a large bank, and I ended up taking a package and starting my current company, Franklin Capital Advisors. Started at the end of 2023, just to give context of timing, doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. Separately, backfilling on some of this, I helped company number 2. I helped get a independent private equity firm started, and so that was a company that bought small manufacturing companies. And I'm on the we'll get back to this later, but I was on a board. Number of the boards I was on was through that company. Company number 3 that I co-founded was this PC Server and Parts. I formed a company that bought this business. I put together an investor group, and so that's how I became chairman of that board. So backfilling though into so I grew up in the accounting and finance. I've been a financial advisor to companies, always lower middle market companies. Along the way, I got very active in professional and charitable organizations. And when you look at it, there's probably about 4 or 5 different companies, not for profit, professional organizations where I've been ultimately, president of the Detroit. I'm in Detroit, so president of the Detroit chapter of might be the Association for Corporate Growth, the Turnaround Management Association, others. I got involved in those organizations and became the president of the Detroit chapter, and the Entrepreneurs Organization, another one. And ultimately, on many of these, got on either the national board, the global board, or or was on a committee on the global board. So that depth of experience really gave me a good insight. And those I was doing from time frame when I was in like my in my 30s, and I was I was a kid, so to speak. And was able to serve on these professional organizations and charitable organizations and get really insight into corporate governance and just start seeing how boards are working in that world. And that ultimately helped the combination of those skills, bringing the financial skills organization, gave me an opportunity to rise within those organizations. And I think that positioned me well for my first, I'll call it corporate board assignments, if you will, opportunities.
Yeah, so it sounds like it built your confidence, it built your experience, but you started pretty young, right? Like, is that one of your recommendations for people to sort of start young and start as early as you can to just get as much experience as you can in a boardroom setting?
Yeah, I think it's a tremendous thing to do. So, and I'll share this Association for Corporate Growth. It's a global organization. I don't know. There's probably it's probably 12,000 members, globally now. And the Detroit chapter is probably at 400 people. When I first got involved, there was maybe 100 people on the board. They
100
just needed,
people on the board or
excuse
100?
me, in the organization.
Got it,
100
got it. Okay.
people in the organization. They
Yep.
didn't have they had a 6, 7, 8-person board. And in fact, I'll never forget this. My daughter was 9 months old. It was a cold, blistery winter day. Our daycare person's car didn't start, and we had a board meeting. And my wife was working; she had to get up and go. I brought my daughter, 9 months old, to the board meeting.
That's
So,
nice.
I gave her a cookie,
You had
whatever.
to.
She sat quietly, never disrupted it. And it was really interesting. Everyone in the room said, Scott, I look at you differently now, seeing you as a dad walking in, with your daughter. I just put a different lens. Well, a year later or 2 years later, they a couple of I'm the youngest guy in the room, right? There's one other person my age, and everyone else is, I'm 33, 4 years old, whatever, and everyone else in the room's in their 50s and 60s, and they came up to me, Scott, we think you need to be the next president, and I said yes, and interestingly enough, I put a demand on them. I said I'm going to do it, but every previous president, they had their administrative assistant be the administrative assistant for the organization. And I had just started this Amherst. We just started this, and I said I can't carry the burden of having my administrative assistant. We had one administrative assistant in our firm. She can't do all the administrative one. We got to hire someone, and that forced the organization to professionalize itself. And
Right.
so that was a great experience. But back to your question, I always think in everything, start young if you can. You get the benefits of compounding. The effects of compounding. Your experience compound. So so I always would say start young if you can.
And so, and again, a lot of people who listen to my podcast are either on boards and want to get onto more boards, or they've never served on a board, but they think they're going to like it. What do you like most about the corporate boards that you've been on? What really sort of speaks to you, and what your purpose is?
Yeah, and so when you add it up, there's probably like 8 or 10 corporate boards I've been on over the years, and several things that are the positives. One, you get to look at a lens not as the operator, owner. It's not, you're not dealing with the issues day to day. So you're maybe you're not 40,000 feet, maybe you're 2,000 feet. So you're not caught in the quicksand, if you will, when there's a really challenging issues. You get to look at them at a little higher level. You can see big picture issues. You can help set direction and not have to be the person that does the day to day. And there's something that's really nice about that. And that part of it, I think, is real refreshing. And you can bring your breadth of experience to issues And like, I'll give an example. One, like, I was on a board of a company where they were they're physically moving the facility, and they put together a budget. And I just looked at the CEO and said, "You got to double your budget." And he goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Just trust me. Everything costs twice as much, takes twice as long. I don't know where you're going to blow the budget, but just trust me, double it."
Mm.
Well, I was wrong. They should have tripled it.
Oh dear.
And of course, and that actually, initially enough, they added maybe 50% to
Right.
the budget. It wasn't enough, and can that cause a lot of problems for this company?
So again, people might think they want to serve on a board, and by the way, people I speak to, they have various different reasons why they want to serve on a board. For a lot of them, it's being able to guide companies and advise and not be the doer, right? Just as you mentioned. But I try to prepare them for some of the things they may not like about boards, which could be some of the dynamics. It could be some of the requirements that time requirements potentially as well. What are some of the reasons? What are some of the things you don't like about serving on boards?
So, like, a really good example is one we just were talking about. Um, you give the guidance, say you really should look at this, think about this. In this case, double your budget, and he added 50%. That wasn't enough, and again, I think that caused a lot of challenges. And so you could give direction, you can mentor. You know, they don't always listen. You're not, you could see sometimes, this is going to be a problem, and you can just see it, play out, and you could, I don't want to say pound the table, but you could pound the table and not get the change that's needed.
Yeah, I don't, it's never easy, right? Like none of these boards are easy. Would you say, and I hear this a lot from other board members as well, would you say that some of the best board experiences that you've had have been as a result of the people, or has it been as a result of something else?
Well, it's one of the fun things about being on boards is you meet other people and other interesting people. And actually, when I think of my not-for-profit, professional organizations, and charitable organizations, um, when I got involved in those, I worked with people that were extraordinarily bright, accomplished, articulate, and interesting. And and I got access to people that I would not have gotten access to otherwise. And I found that to be beneficial on a personal level, just
Mhm.
tremendously. And I think that helped me career wise, incredibly so. And and you think about it, again, I talked about your career and the successes you have compound, and having access to to interesting people that that has helped me tremendously. So I benefit a lot from being involved in these organizations. Yeah, I put a lot of time into them. I worked hard, but in these organizations clearly got the benefit of me doing that. But I also got a personal benefit. And so to me, and then later in the corporate boards, same thing. You meet interesting people, bright people, people that have different perspectives. And I find that just to I believe in lifelong learning. And
Yep.
so, lifelong learning is going to be the person next to you who says, "Well, this is how I do it at my company."
Yeah, I hear that a lot actually, the lifelong learner. That's an attribute that a lot of people I work with say that they have. So that's very common. And are there any other common themes you think among being across being an effective board member today? And what does being effective mean to you?
So I'll share a funny story. This was on the Jewish Federation of Detroit, and the COO of the organization was leaving to to go actually work. He was going to take over running the state of Michigan for Deloitte. It was a great opportunity for him. And at his last board meeting, I went up to him afterwards, congratulated him, on his, wished him well. And he didn't quite poke me in the chest, but effectively he says, "You have a role on a board, and don't ever forget that. You hold people accountable, you ask good questions, and you're not afraid to raise issues and dig into things." And I view that as sort of my role on a board. I'll never sort of forget this. I was on this was a national charity finance committee that I'm on for an organization, and the president, the lay leader president of the charity, was at the finance committee, and we had an all-day meeting in New York, and the woman who was the lay leader, she's not financially sophisticated. She's not, she doesn't have a financial background. She's great on many of the programming, the operations, and whatnot. She just said to me, says, "I really appreciate the questions you ask. I know that we're in good hands. Our finances are in good hand, and that gives me comfort." And so, one of my superpowers is understanding financial information quickly and being able to dive in and see issues and identify risks. And so I use that super strength when I'm on a board, private, public, not for profit, whatever it is. I use that super strength all the time, and people appreciate that. Sure, sometimes I'm asking questions that make people uncomfortable, but the 99 of 100 times, it's people are appreciating it and are raising things that not everyone else saw. So so I think it's really important to do use your super strength when you're when you're involved.
And I think that's part of the great thing about being on a board, right? Is that you're in your area of expertise, although you probably cross over into a lot more, but you have your area of expertise. The other person you were speaking about, they have their area of expertise, and you kind of come together. And like you said, you have that trust, you rely on each other to make very good decisions. But at the end of the day, you have to vote, right? So it has to be an individual vote. But the whole beauty of having, a diverse group, right, is that for that reason, right?
Oh, absolutely. You have to have that. One of the manufacturing companies I'm on the board of, the CEO is very focused on growth, and this company has had margin questions. They have a huge backlog. They've had problems with late shipments, and I raised the whole question of, wait a minute, are we growing at the expense of margin? Are we creating a problem because we have we're selling all this, yet we're still behind on deliveries? And then another guy on the board who is a much more manufacturing operations background, he speaks up then, he contributes his point of view. I'm coming from a financial point, he's coming from an operational point, and that diversity of background, is really important, because I can talk around it, but he's really an expert.
So in boardrooms today, and I know that conversations and agendas are changing quite frequently, but let's say manufacturing, because that's or the areas that I think you maybe excel in. But what are the discussions that are going on in the boardroom today that you can share with us? Obviously, that are maybe interesting for the audience to learn about.
So the past 6 months, it's all been tariffs. And, what does that mean for margins? That's been just a tremendous, aspect of what people are currently talking about in terms of the operational side. But back a year or two ago, labor was a big issue. It still is, depending on companies and regions, it still can be an issue. Availability of labor. I think another thing that you're seeing in companies today, broadly speaking, is just where's the business going revenue wise?
Mm.
What's happening with revenue and customers? There's a lot of businesses struggling right now. Their top line revenue is just down. So there's a fair bit of that. And then I would say in every boardroom, with the exception of what I'll call, your multi-generational family businesses, almost every other boardroom at some point is getting into, is there going to be an exit? Should there be an exit? When will there be an exit? What do we do to plan for that exit? I know I'm dealing with that with several of the companies I'm involved with. We get, that's an ongoing discussion because these are not meant to be multi-generational businesses.
Right. Right. And I think the story of growth is definitely, I would say it's the number one thing that boards are looking for. And so if someone were to promote themselves or create some kind of value proposition, they would want to focus very heavily around the area of growth. And just thinking about that, Scott, what would be your advice for someone who is seeking a corporate board role? Let's say it's their first corporate board. What would be your advice in terms of kind of getting ready for that and thinking through what is a value proposition, right? What are they going to tell people?
Yeah, well, so first, I think it starts with get prepared. So how can you get prepared? You have your relevant experience. Think about and how you can make that board better, what you can do to enhance that. And I in my path, being on professional and charitable boards helped me tremendously. It elevated my I'd say stature in the community by taking on meaningful roles, and having real positive contribution. So when I had the chance for my first true corporate board experience, I in this case, it was an ESOP company. They needed an independent board member, and they interviewed a few people. And I think, my overall experience fit really well with what they were looking for. And, I think having all that collective other board, not for profit, charity and professional organization board experience helped tremendously.
Yeah, and so thanks for that, and I think that's great advice, and I think that the preparation and the networks, right? You were building phenomenal networks through these charities and through these professional associations, which I think is something that you need to continually do. And I just want to mention also, this is a very, very good point. I'm not suggesting people should show up to board meetings with their children. However, you showed a certain level of commitment and discipline and loyalty by doing that, right? And you didn't disrupt the board meeting or anything like that. I think there's also an element of that. I think there's a trust element and a discipline and someone you can rely on, right? And so you prove that. And I think that is consistent, needs to be consistent, right, across your career as well. Would you agree?
Oh, 100%, Naomi. It's the it's that trust is earned over time. Credibility is earned over time. And the if you think about that, in a way to demonstrate capabilities, and earn that credibility and build that trust with people is by, showing up and being prepared and contributing. I mean, so there's board meetings where, where I'm at, and you can just tell people are, they're not engaged. They're just there. They're listening. They don't come with questions. They're not raising issues. They're just there. They want the glory of being on the board, but they don't necessarily do the work. And you know, and that's, I go back to that time when the COO had the conversation with me saying, you have a role on a board. You need to, don't stop doing that. Don't stop asking questions. Don't stop digging in and but by definition, what he was saying is, he was recognizing the previous contributions and effort, and recognizing how important it was, because there are people who just show up and want to show up
We
for
all know
money.
who they are. Yep. Yeah. So just as a final question here, Scott, thanks for sharing all of your insights here. But can you share a story where you have had to sort of step up as a board member in a pretty meaningful way? I know there's a story you wanted to share with the group here.
Yeah, there was a situation where it was a fiduciary board, and there was a payment to an insider that should not have happened by mistake. It wasn't purposely done. It wasn't nefarious. It was a mistake. And there was the insider proposed to do something to fix that. That candidly wasn't really that good of an idea. It really didn't remedy the situation. And one of the other board members and the insider were going at it. And it wasn't, and it was just not, we weren't going to get to a productive outcome. So at that point, I just did a time out. Here's what we need to do. We need to set up a special committee of the board. The insider will not be on that committee, and we're going to come up with a solution. The insider can accept or reject it, but we're going to come up with something that is, that the committee believes is fair to all parties. And we ultimately did that, and we did it in a way that minimized unnecessary friction and volatility. And I think we got to the right answer. And I'm not sure in a regular full board meeting we would have gotten there.
Yeah, well, I think that also speaks to your role as a chair on a board, right? Because the chair, some people think the chair is some sort of leader of the board. They're not. They're meant to bring people together, right? And have collaboration. And as you said, if there is a disagreement, to get people to come to some kind of middle ground, right, and agree on how to move forward. And of course, it's in the best interest of the shareholders, right? What is the best interest of the shareholders at the end of the day? So I would say that speaks very highly to your role as a chair. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's basically, sometimes it was grabbing the bull by the horns, if you will. Take a leadership role to come up with a solution. In this case, and I was not the chair of that board. But I chaired that committee, that's the special committee, that's right. Saying, all right, let's come up with a way to solve this in a way that's rational and not, and stop the yelling.
Well, Scott, this has been really enlightening. I want to just do a quick summary. We've talked about serving on board, starting early, starting to get experience as quickly as we can. We've talked about what we like about serving on boards and what are some of the challenges as well. And then, of course, some great stories here about, situations that you've been in where you've been tested, right, as a board director. But I think in general, this is a career that you really enjoy, I can tell. And I think the challenge, as you said, is a lifelong learner, right? It's sort of intellectual challenge as you go. So thank you, Scott. Thank you so much for joining me. And tune in for more podcasts. And also you can go to my website, www.theboardroomco.com, and sign up for my newsletter as well. But Scott, thank you so much for joining us here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Naomi. It was a pleasure speaking with you this morning.